I'm Zach Menchini, Campfire Farms. We're in Malino, Oregon, and we raise livestock, specifically pork, chicken, and duck, as well as a small egg layer flock. My soil success story is this morning, one of our employees came in and said, boy, it looks like a golf course out there. We're getting great germination on some cover crop that we seeded a few weeks ago. And it's not generally not, the goal to be running a golf course, but I'm taking it as a compliment. So that was nice to hear. So that means we're done with introductions now, Ashley, is that correct? Okay, great.
You're there.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, everybody. It's great to have you here and have your interest in soil health. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And specifically, thanks to Ashley and Dominica for coordinating this event. These types of discussions are really important, and this topic is extremely important. So now we're going to kind of turn it over to you guys and open up the floor. So just a tip, if you'd like to temporarily unmute yourself, you can use the space bar. I use that a lot, and that just to make sure that we can hear everybody. Also, so let's start with how we define soil health, and we'd like to hear from you all now. So feel free to unmute yourself and jump on in. When you hear the words soil health, what does that mean to you, and what kind of practices lead towards soil health?
Oh, Sherry, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Oh, the spacebar thing doesn't work on my laptop, I guess. I was just saying lots of worms.
Great, yeah, lots of worms. Microbial or life in the soil, quite literally, right? Anybody else? Well, I'll get it started here. Here's a definition that the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, has determined. Soil health is the continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. How about Elliot? Elliot and I are good friends. How's it going, Elliot?
Darn you, Zach. Hi, how you doing? Yeah, I'm just up the road from Zach, so yeah. I don't see Zach often enough. And the kids. Yeah, well, soil health is the ability to produce. Healthy soil can produce. Unhealthy soil cannot produce. That's my version of it. And right now, I have unhealthy soil, as judged by the amount of grass I don't get. So.
Thank you, Elliot. I'm sorry for picking on you.
That's okay.
So what are some of the put it another way, what are some of the practices that we can adopt to improve soil health? That's a real layup. Come on, guys.
Sorry. Mulching.
Mulching, yeah, keep it covered.
Yeah, and keep the runoff down.
Yep, reduce erosion. Yep, absolutely. What's something that really contributes to erosion? I'll throw that out there. I mean, not only just tillage, bingo. So minimizing disturbance is another way to put it.
Pam, did you want to share? I see you unmuted there for a sec.
Oh, I was just going to talk about compost, and we actually were very fortunate. We went to Three Creeks Brewing, so a combination between getting spent grain from a brewery and getting leftover coffee from a local coffee place, and taking just our garden waste and putting a chicken coop near it so that the chickens could just kind of forage around in the compost pile. And we had great luck with making compost for nothing in a very short period of time.
Great, thank you, Pam. So yeah, just to put a bow on it, we're minimizing disturbance through reduced tillage and other things that might cause disturbance, whether it's livestock or anything else. maximizing soil cover, so using things like mulches, or ideally it's plants, keeping living roots in the soil as cover, and maximizing biodiversity. So that's increased microbial activity, as well as integrating livestock wherever possible into a farming system. So what's something that you all wish you could have done, or wish you could do, and what's stopping you? So what are the roadblocks that you're facing in terms of improving soil health? Is it a piece of equipment, or access to information, or the budget for seed? What are some things that you wish you could do that you haven't quite been able to?
Well, for us, I think it's always been reducing tillage. If you're doing annual vegetables, it's really hard. And
yeah, an organic annual vegetable system, it's a very difficult thing in organics in particular.
No-till just doesn't really work, or hasn't worked that I've seen very well. So reducing tillage is a big barrier for us, especially rototill.
Right. Yeah, I would encourage you to check out the Rodale Institute work on no-till organics. It's they're based in Pennsylvania, so it's not totally region or climate specific or appropriate for us, but they have done some solid research on that. But it's not easy. I totally get it, Jack.
I would say lack of equipment, having no access to a no-till drill. It would be great to get the Soil and Water Conservation District to buy those and be able to loan those out to farmers. And I wrote a letter to ours and never even got a response about that.
Sherry and Brian, yeah, thanks for that, Sharon. Sherry and Brian, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, and we of course dream of no-till, but we've also run into the difficulties of. There is a local farmer, Jen Aaron, who's been doing some really neat work on no-till, and I'm looking forward to getting freed up enough to maybe visit her operation and find out more. She had a great article in Growing for Market, I think last month, that I really enjoyed. But we are in the same situation. I do think that we have found. I think we found, and based on our soil testing, a pretty, and our results of our yields and such, that we found a pretty good balance ourselves based on careful equipment selection. For example, I use a spader, and I don't do deep tilling at all. I only use a tiller for just a bed, very shallow surface. So I feel like there are some ways of refining equipment that you can find possibly a decent middle ground between till and no-till. And I think I'm edging in on that personally, but I could be proven wrong. But anyway, that was my input on that front.
Yeah, just to follow up on that. So Jen Aaron's farm is called Blue Raven Farm, in case anybody's looking for that. And the advantage of the spader is that it doesn't create that hard pan layer. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but it kind of breaks up the top layer of soil, but it doesn't smash into the bottom underneath. Is that right?
It doesn't create it doesn't polish the ground. When you bury a tiller somewhat deep, and if there's any moisture in your ground, you're going to get that polishing effect. And of course, a subsoiler can break that up if you do it at the right time to some degree. But I have actually experimented using my tiller and burying it as deep as I could, just doing a little patch and then spading right next to it. And it's pretty noticeable when you reach down through the worked soil. With a spader, you can't really find the bottom of it exactly. It just gets hard, gradually gets harder to dig. With the tiller, you can find the bottom of the, and so
absolutely creates that kind of impenetrable hard pan layer. That's going to be a problem moving forward.
What I'd like to find out a little bit more about is that I have also it's like the tiller that I have is a Machio, and it has multi gears, so that if I need to work in some cover crop or some sort of debris, I can slow it. I can drive fast, and I can slow down the tines to where I'm just paddling stuff in rather than spinning so fast like a one-speed tiller.
That's a good point, because the idea, no-till is for some people it's a dream that's unachievable, but even just reducing tillage is going to be a step in the right direction. So it's not black and white. There's a spectrum of improvements that y'all can make, and any kind of reduced tillage is a soil health victory, I would say.
Yeah, I think that people being really specific and careful about their equipment selection, and sometimes it takes quite a bit of search to find those things. Like spaders are not super common. I've just been lucky at I've started with a BCS spader and now I'm up to a 7-foot spader. So it's been I've had like 4 of them in between.
I saw Elliot unmute there for a second. I don't know if you want to share something, Elliot.
I had a quick comment in response to Sharon, I think, had a comment about wanting a no-till seeder, and the local soil district didn't respond. Our Clackamas soil district has one, but it requires a substantial tractor, more so than I have, to operate. So the fact that they have one is great, but I think it requires at least a 45 horsepower tractor with rear hydraulics to make that go. And that's not a giant tractor by any step, but it's more than I have. And given that I'm also trying to not do no-till, or like zero-till really, there's no need for me to have a tractor of that size around, and therefore I don't, and that just sort of precludes even that option, which is unfortunate. So it's just another layer of challenge in accomplishing that.
Absolutely right, and the no-till drills are great tools, but they're similar to the spaders. They're expensive and not available really for everyone in every situation. I would just say that whatever kind of seeding you can do is better than no seeding. So even if you're broadcasting it on the soil surface, roughing it up with a arena drag, that would be a really minimal tillage option, but at least you're increasing that seed soil contact somehow. Sure, you'll have to spend a little bit more on seed. You'll have to overseed it a little bit to get any kind of good germination, but you're going to save money in the long run versus investing in a no-till drill. So yeah, just look for those opportunities is all I would say.
I was just going to add that you remind me that healthy soil and healthy communities go together. And Bonnie's comment about, not having equipment and what Elliot just said reminds me that this is where the granges could really come into place. And Elliot, I'm sure you have a neighbor that's got a 45 horsepower tractor or bigger. And it's like, we need something for farmers where where everyone knows their local 45 horse tractor, these seed drills, they should just be available in every community. So small farmers have a chance. So I don't know exactly how or who that would happen, but certainly something that people could be pushing their granges to do. Our grange just got a very small grant and bought a biochar kiln that local farmers can use, and this kind of like a seed drill, and either someone who could run it with their own tractor or a shareable tractor like that. So the small farmers in the area could tap into the needs of a big farmer without owning the equipment. I don't know. I just would like to see a lot more of that.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Sherry. And Jack Southworth, I've seen you off mute. Did you have something you wanted to add or ask about?
I guess the thing I was going to add, for us in cattle production, we want a covered soil surface, except the problem is that requires leaving a lot of residual behind. So it's a challenge to take enough grass to make a living and leave enough behind to cover the soil surface. But it's a critical thing we do. And Ashley, you said at the start that this webinar is about how to better manage for a changing environment, changing climate. And I think that this covered soil in our arid areas is going to be critical to that.
Jack, could you elaborate a little bit on your process there? I'm curious about how you're reseeding into pasture.
Yes, some, but some of it's native range as well. And mostly we're trying to have healthier grass plants through short grazing periods and long recovery periods, and increasing stock density.
So how do you manage that reseeding into the heavy residue?
We will use some tillage, but the tillage only occurs once in 30 years, maybe once in 40 years.
I see. So it's kind of like a rip off the Band-Aid kind of a thing, and then yep. Okay, cool. Well, that makes sense, and that's a step in the right direction. Absolutely. We have a similar process here on our farm. We will, as it's coming out of Christmas tree production, we're left over a lot of like ruts and stumps and things like that. We'll do a kind of a light disking, seed, drag it, and then it's off and running. So it's a minimum tillage, but it's effective. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I had a question for you. I know you've done a lot of research into soil health and such, and I wanted to kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier. You know, having larger equipment for a no-till drill, that's a hard thing for a lot of people to overcome. But finding that middle ground, for example, like I was talking about with my tiller, I have ability to set it very shallow and I can slow it down. What would be what is your take on, for example, if you've got residue that you need to I have a seed drill. I have one that I bought used some years ago. That's a 3.6 foot seed drill, and it's just been marvelous. I'm like yesterday, that's how I got my cover crop in so fast, is with that drill on my tractor. Is just brilliant. I just love it so much. I feel so lucky. It's not a no-till though. So I will do a very shallow scarf pass to make a seed bed for it, but as shallow and as fast and work the ground as little as possible, so that I have a decent seed bed for my cover crop. How do you think that stacks up as far as maybe a middle ground? Or am I still just doing utmost harm to my topsoil by doing that quick pass?
I mean, I would say that the goal is to have living roots. And if it requires a minimum tillage, I think that the soil will bounce back very quickly. So it's not that there's going to be no damage, but it'll recover faster because it's going to be healthier in the kind of even the medium term. So short-term harm for long-term gain is an individual choice that I think is I can't say, but I think it's a reasonable one in my opinion to make.
And a minimal shallow till is still far better than going deeper, right? And
precisely, yeah. No, definitely. Sorry.
Okay.
I had a question. Has anybody ever, we were thinking that we were going to try using a no-till drill to just seed into an existing pasture that has really compacted soil and a lot of undesirable grasses, and we want to just add a lot of different forage and get some, turnips and radishes and stuff in there to break up the soil. And so I guess as we were thinking that we would just use a no-till drill and go right into the existing pasture. And has anybody done anything like that and had any success?
I would just be worried about skips. Like if your pasture's not like pancake flat, a no-till or any type of drill will if it's not making contact with the soil, it's not going to plant the seed. So as long as you've got a relatively flat pasture, then I think it would work quite well. But if not, then you may need to get a little bit more creative. They just don't have too much vertical travel.
Yeah, it's flattish. It's kind of bumpy and stuff. I think the one that we're going to be having access to does have some sort of spring action so that it does.
I think that'd be great. Yeah, by all means. Another thing to consider is crop mixes. With more sophisticated drills can plant different size seeds at the same rate. So with like they've got like different seed boxes for smaller seed versus larger seed, for example. And so you may not have that option, which limits the. That's another reason why I like broadcasting seed. It's certainly not the easiest way to do it or the most effective way to do it, but I can do a lot of crazy mixes because we just have a little spreader that we have on the back of an ATV, and I just drive around in circles all day.
Okay. Yeah, I think the one we're looking at using is, it has 3 different, you can do 3 seed boxes.
Oh,
and
fantastic.
I know,
yeah.
There are a lot of people over here that are just doing, I'll give a shout out to Sarah Lee Lawrence from Rain Shadow Organics, and she is doing 28 different varieties, and she's planting her spring, summer, and winter cover crops on the fields that she's not farming in for that season, and she does them all in one planting.
Cool. Yeah, diversity in cover crop species is very important as well. I would say it's not, you getting something growing there is priority number 1. But if you are able to plant a few different, say a small grain with a legume for nitrogen fixing, or if you've got an area that's compacted, maybe it needs something like a radish or something like that to break things up. Every cover crop has a superpower, I like to say. So there's so they all have different strengths and weaknesses. Consider your exit strategy too, particularly if you're in a annual vegetable situation. What are you going to do in the springtime to terminate it, mow it, or whatever? Does anybody else have anything to add on that topic, or Ashley, should we move on to another question? What do you think?
I just had a real quick question for you again.
Sure.
When you broadcast and don't work it in, do you ever have much bird loss for like some of the oats or rye or such? That's what I was finding, that they were actually consuming a lot of it if I didn't work it in quick.
Well, we'll like drag it. We'll run like we have like an arena drag with like just short little spikes on it that roughs up the soil surface. So we do bury it ever so slightly. I'm sure we don't bury all of it. I'm sure it's an imperfect tool. I'm sure we have some bird loss, but we overseed. Like I'll seed at 150% of a broadcast rate to accommodate that. Yeah.
I just wanted to add one more thing too, Zach, and that just for people who are just sort of starting with the cover crop is we, for years, for a couple of decades, have used Austrian field peas as one of our legumes, and you can harvest those in the spring and sell them as pea greens, and they're really, really good. They're delicious and they're free or sort of a double bonus. And one year we didn't get our regular source, and we ended up with English peas, and they didn't work. For one thing, they winter killed, really, they were gone. So we didn't have any that spring. But anyway, I just want to give a little.
You definitely want a winter pea. You want a winter pea for sure. There's Austrian, and there's one other variety called Icicle that are very good. So appropriately named. Fava beans.
Taste good too?
I can't say there. Yeah, sorry, I don't know. I'll ask the pigs. But fava beans are another cash/cover crop option that do well here. They're very acid sensitive, so if your pH is low, don't bother. And they don't like wet feet like some legumes. So you need good drainage. You need relatively neutral soil for favas in my experience.
There was a question in the chat from Nina asking if anybody has tried the Joel Salatin method of compost production, where you have chickens and bunnies in a greenhouse with about 2 feet of mulch.
Well, I suppose not. I mean, there are certain. Go ahead, Nina. Were you going to chime in?
Oh, just to say it doesn't sound like it.
Please report back.
I'll give it a go. It seemed like a brilliant way to create some high value compost in a season with minimal labor inputs. And then you also get the chickens and the rabbits up on out of it as well.
Yeah, some passive heat from the breakdown of the compost too. I think that sounds smart.
Mm-hmm.
I would, this is Elliot Mason, not using the chicken and rabbit method, but a corollary to that one is in my barnyard for the cows. I just have, 40 yards of wood chips, and that over the winter just turns into, this combination of goo. And then when that is picked up and distributed into the fields, that works quite well. I am not doing the full composting of it in terms of letting it sit in a pile and really cook down, but just putting it straight onto the fields. And those areas that were covered with that have definitely looked better.
Great, thank you. And I guess with an eye on the time here, maybe we can ask what are some folks, what are your favorite resources for learning about this besides this discussion group, of course? What are some other things that you've done, or that like things that you like to lean on in terms of podcasts? I would love some podcast recommendations. I remember I used to listen to the Chris Blanchard Farmer to Farmer podcast all the time, but unfortunately Chris passed away a few years ago, and I've been searching for another one. Or books I can recommend just to get things started. Gabe Brown's Dirt to Soil is a fantastic book on this topic. But if anybody else has any recommendations, please let me know.
That's where I learned it.
There was a, oops, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, we had with Multnomah County, the cover crop class that I went to a couple of weeks ago, and there's a book that they recommended, and I'm trying to remember, Profitable.
Managing Cover Crops Profitably, the SARE publication.
I plan on getting it, so I just wanted to throw that out. It's not a book I have yet, but.
Yep, it's nationwide, so it's not region specific, but a lot of great charts, and it's very useful in many. I lean on it really hard. There's a PDF copy available on the SARE website completely for free too. So Managing Cover Crops Profitably.
And I'll be sending out a couple of just online resources that we found at ORCAN about both cover crops and kind of more broadly farming for climate resilience. But yeah, always open to hearing others so that we can share more broadly with our farmer network for sure.
Nicole Masters has a really good book out, and I can never remember this, but something about soil. But that's been a really helpful resource as well.
Yeah,
great, thank you, Pam.
And then I know that Bonnie had an earlier question. Was it Bonnie about if there's anywhere in Western Oregon to rent equipment? And I know we talked really briefly about a couple of opportunities, but I do think it's maybe dependent on the county that you're in. But if anybody else has anything to add on that, like Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District does do some rentals, as I think someone mentioned, but does anybody else have any other ideas for that?
Sounds like we need to start one.
I think so. I can kind of chime in. I'm part of a group of, we're all flower farmers. So we have about 10 farmers that joined a Slack channel, and we just, share information on there. And that's been a great place to share tools. So we just created a spreadsheet of all the equipment we had. It's mostly hand labor for flower farming. Some of us have BCS walk behind tractors, some of us don't. And so we've just put up all our resources into a spreadsheet and just share. We just had our BCS. We don't use it very often, so it's been off at somebody else's farm this summer, and it just came back this weekend. And that's been really nice to just have a group of people you trust that you can just move equipment around as you need.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. And also on that note, there's the Portland area. This is really region specific, so apologies to people outside the Portland area, but there's the PACSAC, Portland Area CSA Coalition, has a old school listserv that there's a lot of has a lot of members, and if folks, I've seen a lot of like equipment requests come across on there, and usually someone can help people out. So if you're in the Portland area, the PACSAC listserv is a good resource.
Zach, it's actually been officially changed. It's the Pacific Northwest CSA Coalition. So it is trying not to be Portland
Excuse me.
so much,
Well,
so.
thank you. Well, unfortunately, I think it probably is in reality is still pretty set, but I'm glad that they're trying to go a little broader.
Any other last minute questions before we phase into our closing?
I have a question about the use of subsoilers, because in a lot of the regenerative agriculture, permaculture sort of stuff, there's a lot of reliance on using keyline or subsoil plows to do things. And yet, boy, there are very few of them in the Northwest, judging by looking at Craigslist ads for these things. And I'd be curious if anybody else has had success using a subsoiler, or if there are reasons people are not using or are using subsoilers. Thank you.
I mean, I would say that they are a lot of different pieces of equipment could do that job. I mean, it's a plow, more or less. It's maybe somewhat deeper, but I've also heard them called, well, and they're different. They're not exactly the same, but they provide a similar kind of function. And they do a lot of short-term damage. I mean, it's the same idea of that came up earlier of, you got to rip off the Band-Aid. If that is the only way that you can farm a particular piece of ground and improve the soil health in the long run, then maybe it's worth doing, but they do a lot of temporary damage, I would say. So just consider it carefully, but I don't know. I mean, it's just an older type of equipment. I don't know, maybe Brian has some, I know you have some experience with, well, I don't know if you have direct experience, but you may have something to say about this.
Yeah, I was listening intently to this discussion and was actually taking off my mute to ask you what you think of subsoiler. I have one that I bought years ago. It's a little less than 2 feet deep, and it's just a single shank, because that's, even my most powerful tractor, I don't know if it could handle any more than that. And I wanted to ask you, actually, what I had in my mind that any chance to subsoil at the right time was a good thing to do. And I remember I said, hey, I'm going to do it this year, because I actually have some fields that were open and fallow during the dry season. And so I went out and did it. And as soon as I came home, Sherry said, are you sure that that's still a good thing to do? And I was like, oh, I just assumed it was. And so I was going to ask you, and you were indeed saying that it was had mixed.
Well, it's in some cases, I think it's unavoidable if you've got an area that has very poor drainage, or I mean, it has some plow damage some tillage damage, rototillage damage in the past. To improve infiltration, to maybe move something out of a swamp condition, then it may be unfortunately necessary. But I think it's kind of an implement of last resort, I guess.
Oh, and what about it do you feel is damaging?
Well, it does, it breaks up those, like, the layers of aggregate, not so much in the level of a rototiller, but it's just, that's a real deep till renovation strategy. I guess, yeah, I mean, it seems unnecessary to me unless there's an issue that is unsolvable by other means.
We had a class here years ago, and like I say, I have the subsoil and I haven't used it that much, but we had a class and we studied our soil on our property and went to different sites, and they kind of dug and looked, and we had quite a bit, I don't know if quite a bit, but numerous pockets of, I think they call it loess.
Oh, yeah.
That shows, I believe, possible drainage issues and anaerobic activity, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've thought that over the years that's why I bought the subsoilers. When I did get a chance, and my thought was, you don't want to use it except for when the soil is dry, so that it will fracture, correct? So instead of just digging a trench, it will actually go down and hopefully fracture a pan that may have been created under there.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah,
that's what I did this season. I had a field that, and I haven't had this happen very often, but I had a field that stayed fallow, and it was dry, and it's interesting soil in this one field. And man, it really, it really broke things up. And it was quite dramatic, the kind of chunkiness that it pulled up, because the soil is very interesting in this one section. And I did have the thought, am I doing more damage than good? But I think it was doing good, and I hope it was doing good.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, yeah, let us know what you find, I suppose. But yeah, I would say that use it. It has its place, but that's a pretty unique situation. I know that it's about 1 o'clock, and Ashley has some wrap up stuff that you wanted to do, so I'll turn it back over to her. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much. I know there was one outstanding question about fava is the best time to plant them. So if people want to put some additional answers in the chat, that would be great. Thank you so much to everybody for taking this time during this busy time of year, although here in Portland, a little bit rainy. So thanks for sharing your stories. I'm going to put up a quick poll for folks to let us know how this session has gone for you. And I'm going to have some follow-up resources on soil health as well as cover cropping that we'll share. Thank you so much, Zach, for facilitating this conversation. I really appreciate your time. And thanks to our family farms, Elise and Jennifer, for your support for this work. This will be available as a recording to folks afterwards. And I'll just leave that, you know, ORCAN is really interested in supporting a farmer-to-farmer education network moving forward. And this is a really great kind of first step out to that. And we're also interested in building something that will be a little bit more consistent over time, so that folks can get to know each other and build a bit more of a community. And if you are interested in staying engaged with Oregon Climate and Agriculture Network's work, we'll send out a quick survey for you to get into our network if we haven't met you before. And really pleased to have you. And thanks for doing the hard work of farming. We really appreciate your efforts. So thank you so much.